All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to class today. You're with the National Constitution Center. My name is Jenna. I am the Director of Learning and Engagement at the Center, and I am here with one of our top scholars, Tom Donnelly. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Jenna, great to be here.
Yeah, and this is going to be a great class today. This week and next week, we are reviewing documents and court cases for the that are usually included on the AP Government and Politics exam. So we're getting you ready to take those AP tests next month. And so we're really happy to be here for you to help you prepare for those classes. This is the introductory session. So this is a good one to, if you're maybe thinking about taking an AP class and want to see what it's all about, see what you're going to learn. So we'll still review all those documents and tell you about them. And then at the 2 o'clock class, we'll dive in a little deeper, go a little heavier. And then also we'll be back again on Friday with Jeff to review the documents as well. So lots of great review for your AP exams. If you have any questions, or if you've already taken the AP test and want to share some insights, feel free to put that in the chat as we go along. But Tom, let's just dive right in.
That sounds great, Jenna. Where should we start?
Let's start with the document that started it all, the Declaration of Independence. What do students need to know about the Declaration? What's the kind of important takeaways to keep in mind as they're taking their AP test?
Well, it's a good one to start with, Jenna. When we think of the Declaration of Independence, there's a way in which we can think of it as our nation's statement of purpose, our core creed. And so it's both a theoretical document, but a really, really practical one. So the Declaration of Independence itself was just that. It was our statement to the world that we were declaring independence from the British Empire. It was authored by a committee of 5, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston. But Thomas Jefferson was the primary author. And when Jefferson spoke later at the Declaration, he said what he was trying to accomplish was not to set out something new, but to really try to restate what he thinks were the core beliefs of the American people. And so they really blend together two big ideas that were important to the American Revolution and to the founding generation as a whole. One is natural rights, and the other is popular sovereignty. So natural rights are this idea that we have certain rights just because we're born. We are born free and equal. We have certain rights like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We don't get them from the government. We get them from God or nature. And so these are just things that we get, again, just for being born, just for being human beings. And then furthermore, what we learned from the Declaration of Independence is sort of the larger theory of how we get a government. And so we believe in a government that's rooted in popular sovereignty, which means it's a government that's rooted in the consent of we the people. And so we the people come together to form a government, and then the government has a job. The government's job is to protect our natural rights, to protect our life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, our safety. And then this is a binding contract, a social contract between the people and their government that's backed up by the biggest natural right of all, which is the right to alter or abolish that government if it's not doing that job. That's what we did with the Declaration of Independence. And the last part of this, Jenna, is that the Declaration of Independence is also a really cool document because it just practically tells the world why we're declaring independence. So a lot of the document itself are a list of grievances against King George III and against the British Empire. And we thought it was our duty to both state the purpose behind our nation, the broad principle of how governments form, but also why it is that the British Empire was not living up to those commitments.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's not just, we don't pay taxes anymore. It's they took it to a higher level and said, this is how a government is supposed to function. This is supposed to be, this is the role of the people. This is the role of the people in charge. And you violated that, King George. And they brought receipts, as we say. They said they listed out those grievances, and that list of grievances is going to come up again. We're going to see kind of some of those later, right? In some of these other documents we're going to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of what we're going to be writing into, for instance, the Bill of Rights, but the Constitution are sort of protections against what the British Empire had done with us while we were colonists. We didn't want our new government to abuse us in a similar way.
Yeah. All right. So speaking of the new government, we have a couple governing documents that we're going to talk about, and one maybe a little less familiar is that Articles of Confederation, because this was our first governing document. So tell us about the Articles of Confederation.
Yeah, so before we have the US Constitution, we already have a framework of national government, the Articles of Confederation, which is approved by Congress in 1777, ratified by the states in 1781. And if there's one thing to know about this framework of government, it's that it created a weak national government. So there's not a lot of power given to the national government and a ton of power left with the states. And so it's the Articles of Confederation, they called it a league of friendship. And so a way of thinking about the Articles of Confederation is that in certain ways, it was more like the United Nations that we have today than the United States of America. If we're thinking about the Articles of Confederation, we should know a little bit about its structure and about its powers as well, or lack thereof. In terms of structure, the Articles of Confederation is organized around Congress. So there's a legislative branch that has all of the power. There's not a separate executive branch. There's not a separate judiciary. So we're lodging all power in this Congress, and the states are represented in Congress by the principle of equal representation. So each state, no matter whether it has a lot of people or not a lot of people, every state gets one vote within the Articles of Confederation. The last thing to really note about the Articles is that we really wanted to retain a lot of power in the states, so we didn't give this new national government a lot of power that national governments usually have, like the power to tax, the power to regulate interstate commerce, the power to force the states to basically bring troops if we need them. Instead, we would have to, the national government would have to make what were called requisitions or requests to the states, and the states voluntarily either gave the money or the troops, or they didn't. And you can imagine how well that went a lot of the time. And sort of the last thing here, Jenna, before I forget, is what we noticed with the Articles of Confederation was it wasn't working very well. And so this is part of what's going to drive the push for the new Constitution, are learning the lessons of what we thought the Articles of Confederation got wrong. And one of those things we thought that it got wrong that was really big was its process for amendment. So the only way to amend the Articles of Confederation was through the unanimous consent of the states. And because this is such a high bar, even as people got to see that the Articles of Confederation were fatally flawed in certain ways, we weren't able to pass any amendments, which is what helped spur the Constitutional Convention and eventually the United States Constitution itself.
Yeah, it's trying to get, we see it today, how many people disagree and how hard it is to get legislation passed, like trying to get everybody unanimously to agree. I can imagine that would be pretty much be impossible to function. Absolutely. Not a very practical rule. So those big takeaways of the Articles of Confederation is that, there's no separation of power, that one house, kind of everything in that one house of Congress, and really hard to amend and not very powerful. Most of the power still lied with the states. That's absolutely right. And so they, what did they do, Tom? They came to the Philadelphia to amend their express purpose was to update the Articles, right? But that's not what they did in Philadelphia. That's right. In February 1787, Congress called for a convention of the states to meet in Philadelphia for the, quote, sole and express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation. But what we know is that so many of the delegates at the convention had other plans. James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, they were all looking not just to amend the Articles of Confederation, but to create a new framework of government. And so what the task really for them was that they wanted to create a new government that was more powerful than the national government under the Articles of Confederation, but also one of limited powers. So it was about striking that right balance of giving the national government more power, but not too much. Because we did just fight a revolution against the powerful British Empire. We didn't want to just lodge so much power in this new national government that it might that it might abuse our rights. And so with the Constitution, it's written and signed in 1787, ratified in 1788 that next year. Should we tick through some of the key articles of the Constitution? Let's go through those articles one by one so you can kind of tell us how it set up that government and then separated those powers to have that check to make sure that it still was powerful enough, but not too powerful, right? Absolutely. So it begins, of course, with the preamble, the famous words, "We the people," which is, again, sort of a statement of purpose for this new government, and reminds us, again, that this new government is rooted in the principle of popular sovereignty, which we already discussed with the Declaration of Independence, but this idea that this government is really based on the consent of we the people. Then there are 7 articles to the original Constitution. Articles 1, 2, and 3 lay out the 3 branches of government. So beginning with Article 1, Congress. Congress is the legislative branch of the national government. It's tasked with making the laws. The founding generation expected Congress to be the most powerful branch.
And so another thing that they did with Congress is they thought it was too dangerous to place all power in just a single house of Congress like we did with the Articles of Confederation. And so instead we divided Congress in two. And so we have two houses of Congress, a US House of Representatives, which is organized under the principle of population. So states with more people have more representatives and more political power in the US House of Representatives. And then the US Senate, which is based on the principle of equal representation. So again, each state, no matter whether it has a lot of people or not a lot of people, has the same amount of political power. They get 2 senators in the US Senate. And so that was the Connecticut Compromise of the Constitutional Convention, but it's the key way in which we're going to organize Congress. It was our way, again, of dividing power within what we thought was going to be the most powerful branch. Article 2 gives us the presidency. And so this is the executive branch of the national government. It's tasked with enforcing the laws. And so the president here, what the founding generation is trying to do is set up a presidency that is sort of weaker than the monarchs that they saw in Europe, but also stronger than the weak governors they found in the United States. And so they were trying to really thread that needle and find a president that had enough energy to administer the laws, but not so much power that the president was going to abuse our rights. Article 2 vests the executive power of the United States in a single president. And much like Article 1, Article 2 lays out certain powers for this branch of government, things like the commander-in-chief power of the Army and Navy of the United States, the duty to take care that the laws are faithfully carried out, things like that. So Article 2 is really our menu of both powers and responsibilities for the presidency. Article 3 then gives us the judicial branch. And so it's headed by a single Supreme Court. The judicial branch is tasked with interpreting the laws. And I'd say that Article 3, the judiciary as a whole, there are 2 big principles and ideas to pull out of the judiciary. One is that Article 3 gives federal judges, including Supreme Court justices, what's known as life tenure. And so they hold their office for life. They hold their office until they either resign, or they could be impeached or removed from office, or they die. And so this was different than the British system where you had royal judges who were dependent on the crown. Instead, here we thought it was important for judges to have independence from the elected branches so they can bring to bear legal judgment when they're deciding legal questions, constitutional questions, things like that. The other thing is that with the federal judiciary, our federal judges get the power of judicial review. And so this is the power to look at actions and laws and practices of the government and say whether they're constitutional or unconstitutional. So those are the 3 branches of government there, Jenna, Articles 1, 2, and 3.
All right, so we've separated powers. There's no longer just one house of one branch. We have a Congress with 2 houses, so even more separation, and then a chief executive and a judiciary that are all independent. Now I know there's checks on each other. So that's kind of the structural constitution. Articles 1, 2, and 3 set that up. What about 4, 5, 6, and 7?
Yeah, so Article 4 gives us, it's kind of a hodgepodge of sorts. It talks about the relationship between the states and their own residents. It tells us how we go about bringing new states into the Union. And it also included the infamous Fugitive Slave Clause. Article 5 gives us the amendment process. And so this, again, it's a reminder the founding generation didn't think it had a monopoly on constitutional wisdom. And so it gives us a process that's somewhat easier, the Articles of Confederation, to amend the Constitution. Over time, we would pass 27 amendments to the United States Constitution. Article 6 gives us the idea, it has the supremacy clause. And so this is the idea that national law and the Constitution is supreme in the United States over state law. And so it gives us a hierarchy of authority of the different sorts of law that exists in the United States. And then Article 7 gives us the process for ratifying the Constitution, which again, what's such a cool feature of this part of the Constitution is it tells us that even though at the convention they had George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, all of these famous founders, that in the end, those delegates left it to the American people acting in their states to say yes or no to this new Constitution. And we came really close to saying no, but it left the power again in we the people to say yes or no.
Yeah, that, so again, pulling all these documents together, that popular sovereignty, the power is from the people, kind of being apparent in the Constitution. Also, some of those articles addressing issues that they saw with the Articles of Confederation, kind of trying to fix those and remedy those issues with the Constitution. So you're kind of seeing how all these documents interact together. And then, like you said, ratification almost didn't happen. Tell us a little bit about, because not everybody, even at the convention, was on board with the Constitution by the time they were done. So that kind of trickled out through the through the rest of the nation. So tell us about the dissenters and then kind of that anti-federalist movement, and then we'll dive into Brutus.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so at the convention itself, most of the delegates that are there on the final day sign the new Constitution, but 3 delegates refuse to sign it. It's these 3, we call them the dissenters: Elbridge Gerry, Edmund Randolph, and George Mason. Those are the 3 dissenters at the end. And so what they say is, there are big problems with this new Constitution. We don't like the Articles of Confederation that much, but this new Constitution is lodging too much power in the national government. It's going to take power away from the states. And the other key complaint is that this new Constitution doesn't include a Bill of Rights. And so as we go into this ratification process, where state by state, we have to say yes or no, specially convened ratifying conventions, state by state, have to say yes or no. These arguments we see from the dissenters end up reverberating in those debates over the ratification of the Constitution.
As Colin pointed out, I have Edmund Randolph labeled twice here. I'm sorry about that. But thank you for taking us through those dissenters. So the anti-federalist movement, I just want to take a pause to correctly label the dissenters. We have Elbridge Gerry. This is George Mason here. And this is Edmund Randolph. So I will fix that for next time. Thank you for pointing that out. So that kind of, that anti-federalist movement that, we don't think the Constitution is the answer, kind of spilled out. And we had this kind of debate playing out in like public newspapers and public forums between the Federalists and the anti-federalists. So we're going to get into all of those different Federalist Papers. But first I want to start with Brutus, which was kind of the anti-federalist, paper of record. So tell us more about Brutus and that publication.
Yeah, just reading Brutus, you can see how sophisticated the anti-federalists are. And so as we're going to these ratification debates, we have the Federalists who support the new Constitution, and then there's a group of anti-federalists who oppose it. Brutus, in many ways, is one of the most thoughtful of the anti-federalist writers. There's still some debate as to who Brutus is. We think it's probably Robert Yates, who is from New York. He was a delegate to the Constitutional Convention, and he actually left the convention early because he thought what the delegates were doing with this new Constitution was dangerous. There was too much power being lodged in the national government, not enough to the states. So he walked out of the convention. And so Brutus is writing largely in the context of the ratification debates that follow, and he's articulating a lot of the key arguments of the anti-federalists. And so what are they? One is, it's kind of amazing. Brutus says, look, I know the Articles of Confederation aren't great. They have serious problems, but don't listen to the Federalists that this is an urgent problem where you have to say yes or no now. You need to think. You need to take a look at this Constitution, look at the arguments on all sides, and not be afraid to say no. Because one thing that history teaches us is that once we give away power to a new government, it's not usually eager to give it back. And so we have to really think carefully before we're going to create this new government. Brutus was concerned that this new government was too powerful, and so that it was granting too much power to the national government, and eventually it was going to he saw the problem as what was called consolidation, which is that basically you were going to take all of this power that was in the states, and over time it was all going to shift to the national government and annihilate the states. And this was problematic, one, because it goes against the system that we had prior to the Constitution, where the states have a ton of power. The other, though, was a broader theory of Republican government. And so Brutus feared that a large republic couldn't succeed. That really the way we want government to be as close as possible to the people, because for good government is rooted in relatively small territories with people who are a lot like one another, where they share a common interest and can legislate together. And so the concern was, if you have a huge new national government that's doing a ton of stuff, you're just not going to have those commonality of interests. You're going to have faction, you're going to have conflict, you're going to have some interests served and some absolutely undermined. And so in this sense, Brutus is echoing a lot of what the best political theory at the time had to say. And again, the key point is that large republics, what we're attempting with this new Constitution, no one's done it before. Look in history, no one has done this before. It's going to fail. We need to rebalance and make sure that we're keeping most of the governing that needs to happen in this country at the state level, where the government is closest to the people, where the people are like one another, and where they can unite together in the interests of the common good, not private self-interest. And so as we get into the Federalist Papers here, we can see immediately how Brutus is in direct conversation with James Madison's famous Federalist 10 essay.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Tom. I think that's a really great kind of summary of that anti-federalist mindset and kind of really legit arguments from them. Those were legitimate concerns, but and they didn't go unanswered. Like you said, there's this conversation going back and forth between Brutus and Brutus versus Publius, as Colin said in the chat. So tell us about the Federalist Papers as a whole. What were they? And then, like you mentioned, Federalist 10, so we'll dive right into that one with James Madison.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Federalist Papers, I mean, we read them today as a great account of how our government is structured and how it ought to work. But at their time, they were political documents. They were part of the conversation around ratification of the Constitution, in part to respond to Brutus. Alexander Hamilton was from New York. We think Brutus was Robert Yates, also from New York. Hamilton's reading these papers by Brutus and says, we have to respond to these papers. There are some good points, some legitimate points in there, but we can answer them. And so the Federalist Papers are a series of essays written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, written under the common pen name Publius.
All right, so we're not going to get into all of them because there was, how many were there total, Tom?
I off the top of my head, I can't think of it. I'm sorry.
Over 70, right? So
absolutely, because we're going to go up to 78.
Right. So we'll just go with a couple. We're going to start with James Madison and Federalist 10.
Yeah, so Federalist 10 is James Madison's response to Brutus. It's also his response to famous political theorists like Montesquieu. Again, their key argument is a big republic with a lot of power isn't going to work. A republic can't work over a large terrain. It can only work in small territories. And what James Madison says in Federalist 10 is, no, I think you're wrong. And what Madison's doing is he's drawing on his own experience living in the United States, being a political leader prior to the United States Constitution, really seeing a lot of the failures of the state governments at the time, and instances where you see majority factions in those state legislatures, so within the states, within those smaller territories, oppressing minorities. And so for Madison, what he's talking about in Federalist 10 is the problem of what he calls faction. And so here, what does he mean by faction? He says, by a faction, I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse or passion, or of interest adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. And so these are groups that come together and in Madison's view end up serving their own private self-interest as opposed to serving the common good. So it's majorities coming together to oppress minorities. Madison's concerned about this. And what he says to Brutus and Montesquieu is that factions are most dangerous in small territories. That's where we see it's easier there for factions to come together because it's smaller. It doesn't require as much coordination and as much communication. And so they can easily come together and repress minorities. And the other thing that Madison thought was that there's something natural about factions. We just can't get rid of them. Freedom gives faction oxygen, and factions themselves come out of our own human nature. So there's no eliminating them. His solution was the new Constitution, though. He said that republics are actually going to succeed most when they're large, because what that does is by creating a large republic, you bring in a ton of different factions, and they're all going to be united against one another. It's going to be tough for any single faction to come together, form a majority to abuse the rights of others. And so this is Madison's big answer to Brutus and political theorists like Montesquieu. No, it's not small republics that work, it's large ones.
Great. That's so great to say. I loved seeing that back and forth. It's Brutus was afraid about small or a big government. He said it worked better when you're smaller. Madison answering that and saying no, here's the issues with having smaller governments. Here's why big government is the answer. It's great to see that back and forth. All right, let's move because I know we only have less than 10 minutes. So let's move through to Federalist 51.
So Federalist 51 is all about constitutional structure. It's authored by Madison. What Madison's explaining is how we use the structure of government to ensure that this new national government is not going to abuse our rights. And for him, he's explaining both separation of powers, the division of power between three branches of government, Congress, the president, and the Supreme Court at the national level. And then also the importance of checks and balances. The idea that you're going to give each of these branches of government the power to check the other. Congress can pass a law, but the president can veto it. The Supreme Court could strike it down as unconstitutional. It's this battle between the branches that are what's going to, in the end, protect our liberties. And so Federalist 51 includes this very famous line from Madison. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The interest of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place, and may be a reflection of human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. But what Madison's saying is we are not angels. And so what we need to do is rely on constitutional structure to ensure that, one, the government can work. When the branches work together, you can have a government that works. But when one branch is abusing powers, the other two branches have the power to check those abuses.
Yeah, I love that quote from Madison. It really does sum it up perfectly. So Federalist 51, look to that one when you want to learn about why the separation of powers really works, how those checks and balances work, kind of why that was built into the structure of government. All right, fast and furious now. Moving on to Federalist number 70, and we'll get to 78 in a minute. Colin, you said that's your favorite, but let's do 70 first.
Yeah, Federalist 70 is written by Alexander Madison. It's all about the presidency. And so the anti-federalist concern is you're creating this new presidency with all this power. What can be more dangerous to the republic? And this is Hamilton's reply. And what he says is, no, you're wrong. What we did with the presidency is we made the decision to lodge the executive power in a single president. So we have one person in charge. There are some dangers to that, but there are great advantages. One of them is that it ensures energy in the administration of government. You're not going to have a bunch of committees arguing with one another when you need to enforce the laws. The decision falls to the president, a single person. And so the president is actually in a capacity to act. And this could be really important in certain contexts like national security. Mm-hmm. So we have this energy on the one hand with the presidency. The other, though, is because you have a single president, we also have accountability. So we're giving the president these new powers to enforce the laws, but the president is clearly the person that's saying yes or no, the clear decider. So in the end, the president will act, and then we, the people, through the mechanisms of government that we just talked about in Federalist 51, but also through elections, can hold the president accountable. So it's a president having more power than the governors in the state legislatures at the time. But because the president is so public, the president will have both energy, but we will also have accountability.
All right, so Alexander Hamilton giving us kind of the reasons why a presidency will work. It's, responding to those fears I'm sure that everybody had about, a king, kind of that one person, but also that, problem with the articles where there was no chief executive, and kind of Alexander Hamilton is telling us why the presidency that they've created is will work for our new government.
Absolutely.
All right. So Federalist, Colin's favorite, Federalist 78. What's this about?
Okay, Federalist 78, also by Hamilton. This is the classic statement of, a defense of the judicial branch, Article 3 of the Constitution. And so what Hamilton has, so the anti-federalists are really concerned about the federal judiciary. They think these new judges have a ton of power. They think the Constitution is really broadly worded. And so they think the judges are well positioned to keep pulling more and more power away from the states and towards the national government. And Hamilton has a few responses to that. One is that he said, no, you're looking at this wrong. Don't be concerned about the federal judiciary. It's going to be the, quote, weakest of the three branches. It doesn't have the power over money. It doesn't have soldiers. All it really has is its own reputation and judgment in order to enforce its decisions. And so he's sort of pushing back against the anti-federalists, saying, don't be afraid of this new federal judiciary. But Hamilton also explains, this new judiciary, it's going to have important powers. It has important responsibilities. We have this new Constitution. These judges take an oath to this new Constitution. When they decide cases, sometimes they're going to have to interpret it. And as part of interpreting that Constitution, they will have the power of judicial review. And so again, this is this power to say that an act of government, a new law of government or something like that, is constitutional or unconstitutional. So Hamilton both pushing against the anti-federalists, saying, no, it's not as though all power is going to the federal judiciary. And on the other hand, saying that by combining life tenure, so judicial independence, with judicial review, the judges in their role there are going to have a key role to play in our new government.
All right, perfect. So that's the judicial branch. That's the reasons behind the judicial branch. I love that those Federalist Papers kind of give us those insight into what the founders were thinking when they created these, kind of while they were persuading people to have faith in it. They kind of had to show their work a little bit with these Federalist Papers.
They showed a lot of work.
Yeah. So as we kind of went through this ratification process, we did eventually ratify the Constitution. The Federalist Papers were a big part of it, but there was one kind of thing that came out of that ratification process, and that was the addition of almost immediately of a Bill of Rights to the Constitution, which is our next document. So tell us about the Bill of Rights. Take us through that.
Yeah, so the Bill of Rights, it's ratified in 1791. It's one of the big acts of the first Congress under the new Constitution. So one of the first things we do with the new Constitution is we decide to amend it. The Bill of Rights arises out of the debates that we have during the ratification process. Again, remember the dissenters arguing that one of the key problems is that there's no Declaration of Rights in the US Constitution. So the Bill of Rights, primarily authored by James Madison, was a response to those concerns. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the US Constitution. And within those 10 amendments, we write many of our most cherished rights and liberties into this new Constitution, like free speech, a free press, religious liberty, the right to a jury trial, just a bunch of different things that we really cared about. One thing to note about the Bill of Rights is that as it was ratified in 1791, it only applied to the national government. So it was only applying to abuses by the national government. But later, with the ratification of the 14th Amendment in 1868 and later decisions by the United States Supreme Court, we've come to apply those Bill of Rights protections, free speech, religious liberty, et cetera, to state abuses as well. That's known as the process of incorporation.
Yeah, and some of those, like the jury trial stuff, that was some of the stuff that was listed in the Declaration, right? Those things that those grievances that we were saying to King George, you denied us. We put those into that Bill of Rights.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to put the grievances next to the Bill of Rights and seeing sort of the differences and similarities. The other is that, James Madison isn't just making up these rights. He's also drawing on the state constitutions that existed before the US Constitution, key declarations of rights like the Virginia Declaration of Rights, and also a lot of the recommendations of the state ratifying conventions during the ratification battle. They sent to Congress recommendations of different amendments to pass. So as Madison's putting together the Bill of Rights, he's drawing on those ideas as well in sort of coming up with those first 10 amendments to the Constitution.
All right, so we're almost out of time, but we have to get to the last founding document, and I'm so happy that it's included because it kind of takes us a couple hundred years into the future, but looking at Martin Luther King Jr.'s and his letter from a Birmingham jail. So why is this one included, Tom? Why is it so important? How does it relate to those other kind of Revolutionary era founding documents? And what's the key takeaways for this last founding document?
Yeah, so it's 1963. We're fast forwarding way ahead. I mean, there are so many interesting features of the letter from a Birmingham jail by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. One of them, though, is a reminder that constitutional reformers throughout American history have often drawn on the power of our founding documents. So the documents we just read, especially the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And so part of Dr. King's argument here is he's explaining to his audience that part of what the civil rights movement is trying to do is to realize the promise of those founding documents, especially the Declaration of Independence. And so his audience here in the letter from a Birmingham jail is actually white moderate preachers. And so what he's trying to do is explain why it is the civil rights movement is doing what it's doing. And so in particular, defending the civil rights movement's push for nonviolent direct action. These are the marches, the boycotts, the parades, the sit-ins, all of these different things the civil rights movement's doing to try to disrupt the status quo and push for greater equality in America. You have these white moderate preachers who say, we like your goals, but we're concerned that maybe you're bringing on too much heat. There's backlash against you. There's violence. Maybe you should just back off a little. Maybe you should cool down a little bit. And what Dr. King says is, what I know is that usually whenever we decide to wait, we get nothing. Waiting becomes never. And so what we're trying to do with this nonviolent direct action is, one, to be nonviolent, to be the good guys in these battles, but two, it is to create tension. We've tried to negotiate. That didn't work. No one is hearing our concerns. And so what we're trying to do is look at unjust laws that exist and oppose them, and we're willing to suffer the consequences for that. We're going to violate laws like Jim Crow segregation laws openly, lovingly, accept our punishments. This is a letter from a Birmingham jail. This is Dr. King, who violated a court order that said not to do any more demonstrations in Birmingham. He's in jail writing these things down. And so what Dr. King's saying is that in the end, nonviolent direct action is the only way we can get those in power to take notice. And that by doing this, what we'll do is we will expose the injustice of the laws on the books. We will expose the injustice of those enforcing Jim Crow segregation. And in the end, what we will do is ensure that we can actually have a nation that lives up to its founding creed. And here's a really soaring passage I'll end with here from a letter from a Birmingham jail, just to give you a flavor. Read the whole thing. It's an unbelievable document. One day the South will recognize its real heroes. One day the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for what is best in the American dream, thereby bringing our nation back to those great wells of democracy, which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for taking us through that document, that and sort of that insight into the civil rights movement. I love that. Not only are they borrowing the language and, kind of repeating the ideas that were presented in the Declaration, they're also emulating the example there. Like, hey, we're saying that, these are our list of grievances. And so that's, and this is how you violated them. I think another point that you made that's really important to remember is that they knew that civil disobedience has consequences. He knew he was going to go to jail because he was breaking that law. And that was kind of part of that deal that he was making. I think that's really important to remember of the civil rights movement. So I just wanted to reiterate that point that you made. Well, Tom, thank you. Whew. That was quite the jog through those founding documents. Again, this was the introductory class, so I'm sure there's a lot of people here who are thinking about maybe enrolling in an AP course, in over the next few years. So I hope you got a little bit of a taste. If you are here because you just wanted that quick refresher before your test, good luck. I'm sure you're going to do great. You can definitely send us any questions. And I also put I will replace the link in the chat for you. But thanks for joining us, and have a great day.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Colin says he thinks that the Gettysburg Address should also be included in the founding documents.
Oh, you can never go wrong with that. Spoken as a true son of Gettysburg.
Are you from Gettysburg, Tom?
No. I'd say Colin is at Gettysburg now, so yeah.
Never knew. And Mandy said she never knew much about the letter from the jail. I guess, because when we talk about King, I know so many people know the "I Have a Dream" speech, but the letter from Birmingham Jail is a really important one to study. And so I'm glad that it's included on that AP test.
It's so powerful, so deep, so sophisticated. It is just an unbelievable document.
All right. Thanks. Thank you, Deb. Thanks, Colin. All right. Well, doesn't look like there's any other questions. So I guess I'll see you at 2, Tom.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Jenna.
Sure. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Colin.
All right. Any other questions before I sign off? Okay. Bye, everybody.